As trainee doctors across Korea continue submitting their resignations to protest an increase in medical schools quota, the government raised its healthcare crisis warning to severe. This means non-face-to-face treatment will be boosted, while public hospitals will be on full standby. Top diplomats of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan have reaffirmed their bolstering of joint cooperation as North Korea continues to escalate tensions and strengthens its ties with Russia. This as they met on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting in Brazil. The U.S.-made spacecraft Odysseus has landed on the moon for the first time in more than half a century and also the first ever by a private company. It's February 23rd, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. As doctors across the country continue their collective action to protest the reform, the government today raised its healthcare crisis warning to severe, which is unprecedented. This means non-face-to-face treatment will be boosted while public hospitals will be on full standby. Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
As the resignations of South Korea's trainee doctors continue to worsen the stability of the country's medical system, the South Korean government has come up with a new measure for the public to be able to reach a doctor. Telemedicine.
The government will, starting today, fully expand telemedicine to make it easier for people to receive general treatment.
This came on Friday at the first Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters meeting chaired by Prime Minister Han Duck-soo to discuss the doctors' collective action against raising the medical school enrollment quota. Before now, telemedicine had been partially available since 2020 during COVID-19 under strict regulations. Only higher-tier hospitals were entitled to provide the service for non-first-time patients, plus for people in remote areas and for appointments at night and on holidays. With the restriction gone until the collective action is finished, non-urgent patients who had their appointments postponed are able to set up a virtual appointment. The government has announced that it will maximize the use of public hospitals as well.
We will maximize the operational level of public healthcare institutions. We will extend the weekday operating hours of all public healthcare institutions to the maximum possible and also expand medical services on weekends and holidays.
Emergency rooms will remain open for 24 hours despite the shortage of specialist personnel. 4 new control centers will open in March to ensure patients with emergencies can be treated on time. Furthermore, employment regulations will be loosened for the time being to help hospitals hire more medical staff. Military doctors will be on duty in hospitals where needed. This comes after the government raised its health and medical treatment disaster crisis warning level to severe as of 8 a.m. Friday, which is one step up from the previous level of alert. With the change, the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters is now dealing with the government's response to the protest. Friday marks the 4th day of the mass walkout. So far, over 9,000 intern and resident doctors have handed in their resignations. That's around 71% of all trainee doctors. Of those 9,000, around 8,000 have left their posts in hospitals. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
On the diplomatic front, foreign ministers of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan sat down in Brazil on the sidelines of the G20 meeting to reaffirm their cooperation for stability on the peninsula and beyond. Shin Se-byuk reports.
The foreign ministers of South Korea, the United States, and Japan agreed to bolster joint cooperation in the wake of North Korea's escalating military threats. This came as South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol met with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Antony Blinken and Yoko Kamikawa in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil on Thursday on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting. This was Joe's first trilateral foreign ministers meeting since taking office last month. Thursday's session also focused on formalizing trilateral cooperation and executing the agreements made during the leaders of the 3 countries' Camp David summit last year. In his opening remarks, Zhou, underscoring 2024 as the 30th anniversary of the inaugural tripartite summit between the three countries, said Thursday's meeting is a symbolic milestone of the collaborative journey of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Meanwhile, Zhou also participated in the two-day G20 foreign ministers meeting in Rio de Janeiro on February 21st and 22nd. Foreign ministers from the 21 member countries and invited nations, as well as representatives of international organizations, explored the G20's potential to address geopolitical conflicts, including the ongoing war in Ukraine. They discussed ways to reinvigorate and enhance multilateralism as a response to a range of global challenges, highlighting the importance of collaboration at the G20 level. Now, Minister Zhou is heading to the U.S. The first thing on his itinerary is to sit down with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York to discuss South Korea-UN cooperation on Friday. On the same day, Zhou will attend a UN Security Council meeting on the occasion of the second anniversary of the Ukraine war. It is the first official UNSC session attended by a South Korean foreign minister since Seoul became a non-permanent member of the UNSC for the 2024-25 term. There, Zhou is expected to highlight South Korea's role and contributions to advancing global peace and security. Following the UNSC meeting, Zhou will sit down with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Wednesday in Washington. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Here in the country, a joint air drill between South Korea and the United States took place on Friday, involving state-of-the-art fighter jets to show the Allies' strengthened deterrence against North Korean threats. The Republic of Korea Air Force said that F-35A aircraft from both countries participated in the exercise and showed off perfect teamwork and operational performance. This is the first time in 4 months that these jets have trained together over the Korean peninsula since October last year. As Ukraine marks 2 years of Russia's full-scale invasion this Saturday, pundits are reiterating the risks of North Korea's role in advancing Moscow's aggressive ambitions, which they believe offer Kim Jong-un an actual testing ground for his weapons ambitions. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung covers their comments.
2 years into the Ukraine war, Russia has been turning to North Korea to seek more gasoline for its fire. The two sides are believed to have been strengthening their military cooperation after Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin met in Russia last September. Pyongyang has allegedly sent around 2.5 million rounds of artillery to Moscow for use against Ukraine. Although early assessment has shown that the decades-old North Korean shells appear to be of poor quality, experts say that simply quantity itself matters on the battlefield.
So quantity is very helpful for Russian operations because they've been going through thousands of shells every day. Having thousands of rounds per day to provide to Russia certainly increases the damage to Ukrainian infrastructure as well as increasing Ukrainian casualties.
What's more concerning, though, is Russia's deployment of North Korea's latest KN-23 and KN-24 ballistic missiles. Ukraine's top prosecutor general Andriy Kostin this week confirmed that at least 24 ballistic missiles recently launched by Russia were from North Korea. Although the accuracy is still questionable, the prosecutor said the missiles killed at least 14 civilians and wounded 70. This could be an opportunity for the North to assess how its new missiles fare in combat situations.
I mean, Russia asked, can you give us these things? And North Korea said, yeah, we can do that. But they said, yeah, we can do that because not only were they going to make money, but they were going to have a testing ground to see how well they worked.
So what effect will this have on the security situation on the Korean peninsula? Experts say North Korea's decision to send weapons to Russia shows that the regime is not preparing for a full-scale war against South Korea, as a major military operation would require massive stockpiles of missiles and shells.
You haven't heard much lately about North Korea testing KN-23s or KN-24s. And they were last year, they were the year before. Does that mean they're really down low on those stocks to the point where they need to hold on to what they've got for wartime use? Interesting question, because they've shifted to cruise missile testing. and making you wonder, is that because they didn't have enough ballistic missiles to continue what they've been doing?
Though there may be no need to prepare for war just yet, it remains to be seen whether Moscow will provide the North with the crown jewels of its military technology in return. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The U.S. spacecraft Odysseus has landed on the moon for the first time in more than half a century, and the first ever by a private company. Our Lee Eun-hee has the latest.
After 52 years, the United States is back on the moon. Lunar lander Odysseus became the world's first privately built spacecraft to touch down on the moon's surface. According to the Houston-based Intuitive Machines, which made the lander, Odysseus successfully achieved this feat in renewed U.S. lunar exploration at 6:23 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday.
Today, for the first time in more than a half century, the U.S. has returned to the moon. Today, for the first time in the history of humanity, a commercial company, an American company, launched and led the voyage up there.
The NASA-sponsored spacecraft is now the first American lunar lander to touch down on the moon's surface since the Apollo 17 mission in 1972. Odysseus, or the Nova C lander, was launched on a SpaceX Falcon rocket on February 15th. On Thursday, one day after the spacecraft entered lunar orbit, confirmation of the landing took several minutes before a faint signal was detected. During the final descent, flight controllers had to switch to an untested landing system due to a problem with the craft's navigation equipment. 2 hours after touchdown, Intuitive Machines announced Odysseus is upright and starting to send data, and that it was working to downlink the first images from the lunar surface. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson congratulating all of those involved, namely Intuitive Machines, SpaceX, and NASA, called the landing a new adventure in science, innovation, and American leadership in space. The lunar lander is carrying scientific instruments from NASA and private contractors that will conduct experiments on the surface. It landed on target near the unexplored lunar South Pole, which potentially has water in the form of ice, something that could be used to provide rocket fuel for missions to other parts of the solar system. Odysseus uses solar power and is scheduled to operate for a week, until the onset of the lunar night, when the lack of sunlight will cause the lander to enter sleep mode.
What a triumph! Odysseus has taken the moon. This feat is a giant leap forward for all of humanity.
Lee Eun-hee, Arirang News.
Today at the National Assembly here in Korea, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo urged Congress to play a more active role in extending the grace period for the Serious Accidents Punishment Act. This call was made during the last day of the two-day-long interpellation session on Friday, with lawmakers quizzing government officials on the economy this time. Han stated that if the extension of the Act's grace period fails to be approved again, the government will consider other possible actions to take. A few weeks ago, the ruling PPP and the main opposition DP failed to reach an agreement over the extension, and the rule has now been applied to smaller companies. This time of the year is usually graduation season here in Korea, and this means the local flower industry often sees a boost in sales. But it's a different story this year, and more people start to look for ways to buy flowers at a cheaper price. Our Park Gon-woo has more on this new trend.
Only about 60%. This is what one flower shop owner said when asked how much sales had recovered during the recent graduation season compared to pre-pandemic levels. Graduation season in Korea during December through February is usually when the flower industry sales blossom. But lately, it's been wilting.
Because people haven't been buying flowers that often, even after COVID-19, the need for flowers has disappeared. If people had been continuously buying flowers, they would be interested in buying them and sometimes even making a habit out of buying flowers.
One expert offered other reasons.
There's the perception that flowers are too expensive. And along with the decrease of the school-age population, shrinking overall consumption are other reasons as well.
According to the auction price data from Korea Agro-Fisheries and Food Trade Corporation earlier this month, the prices of many flowers used in graduation bouquets saw on-year increases. In particular, hydrangea was up by around 150%, gypsophila rose by 30%, and freesia around 10%. Experts say factors include bad weather and increased imports of low-cost flowers. So, due to higher prices, people are looking at ways to buy flowers more cheaply.
I usually go to flower markets and buy them in bulk to get them at a more reasonable price.
Some are even trading flowers through used goods smartphone apps. A graduation bouquet like this can cost as much as between $20 and $50, but they are also being traded at lower prices, sometimes reduced by more than 50% on used goods apps. Bouquets that are said to have been used only for a short time to take pictures with at graduation ceremonies are being traded using these platforms. With this having a knock-on effect on the flower industry, one expert says there are ways to see it bloom again.
The distribution stage should be reduced, prices should be lowered for consumers, and appropriate compensation should be given to farmers and for labor costs due to the change in the labor environment.
And the expert concluded the government should come up with actual measures to revive the industry, along with its 5-year promotional plan announced in 2022 to increase flower production volume by over $520 million by the year 2026. 박건우, Arirang News.
Sports now and the Table Tennis World Championships. South Korea has advanced to the semifinals of the men's team tournament. In the quarterfinals on Friday at the International Table Tennis Federation World Team Table Tennis Championships being held in Busan, South Korea swept past Denmark 3-1. Teams that reach the semifinals get to secure at least a bronze medal even if they lose, as there is no third-place match. With this, it would be the 4th straight time for South Korea's men's team to win a medal at the biannual team event. In the semifinals scheduled for Saturday, South Korea will face the world's strongest team, China, who's aiming for its 11th consecutive world title. Time now for our weekly arts and culture segment. We have our culture correspondent Song Yujin in the studio. Happy Friday, Yujin.
Happy Friday, Jungmin.
What do you have for us today?
Well, Jungmin, it's no exaggeration that the biggest news on the cultural front this week was actors Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Austin Butler, and Stellan Skarsgård visiting Korea to promote their new film Dune Part 2. Now, this movie is gearing up for its premiere in Korea on Wednesday next week. And with this, Timothée Chalamet will have 2 movies on the big screen now. So what's in store for moviegoers this time around in Korean theaters? Let's first take a look.
My name is Timothée Chalamet. I play Paul Atreides in Dune Part 2.
This 28-year-old American actor is currently making waves at the Korean box office. The musical fantasy film Wonka, featuring Chalamet as young Willy Wonka, topped the box office for 22 consecutive days following its release, becoming the first film of the year to surpass 2 million ticket sales. While February is considered a low season for the big screen, Wonka is about to face competition from another Chalamet film, the sci-fi Dune Part 2. This sets the stage for a two-way showdown between the chocolate man Chalamet and the space army commanding Chalamet.
And I feel that my films, whether it's The King or Dune or Wonka right now, have been as warmly received in Korea as they have been anywhere in the world.
It's a blockbuster sequel following Part 1's triumph during the pandemic. Despite COVID's grip, the Frank Herbert novel-based sensation raked in $400 million at the global box office and sold over 1.6 million tickets in Korea alone. This sensation even brought up the term dun친자, meaning Duniac in Korean.
Dune's success comes from the star power of Timothée Chalamet, director Denis Villeneuve's visual effects, and his skillful handling of suspense. Although the genre of space opera wasn't particularly popular in Korea, the movie succeeded because it simplified the original novel's universe into this tight, gripping storyline, making it enjoyable for all.
Part 2 will focus on the main character, Paul Atreides, seeking revenge against the people who killed his family. Oppenheimer director Christopher Nolan likened the movie to Empire Strikes Back, often regarded as the best in the Star Wars film franchise.
I will say that Dune Part 2 is a much more muscular movie, meaning about action. There's more.
However, the two Chalamet movies are facing another strong competitor. The Korean cult thriller Exuma, starring veteran actor Choi Min-sik, ended Wonka's 3-week box office dominance on the day of its premiere. For the movies themselves, it's a competition, but a treat for film enthusiasts.
You know, Eugene, speaking of Timothée Chalamet, his visit is certainly has captured a lot of attention here. I recall seeing pictures of him being taken in downtown Seoul and just a crowd welcoming him at the airport.
Right, he's really popular, so Timothée Chalamet really solidified his fan base here in Korea with his 2018 film Call Me By Your Name. And film critics say his portrayal of a young boy navigating the journey to adulthood resonated profoundly with the Korean audience. And also since then, several Korean celebrities, for example, Girls' Generation Yoona has actually picked him as their dream guy, which makes him more popular right now. And it's been 5 years since Timothée Chalamet last visited Korea, so fans really have been eagerly awaiting his return back to the country.
All right, and before we wrap up, Eugene, anything else coming up in the Korean box office?
Well, a lot to look forward to because only a couple of weeks are left until the Oscars, which is one of the biggest film and TV awards in the world. So several Korean theaters have started screening Oscar-nominated films. For example, last year's Cannes Palme d'Or-winning French film Anatomy of a Fall, which has received 5 Oscar nominations, has been in cinemas since last month. And coming up, Korean-Canadian director Celine Song's Past Lives, nominated for 2 Oscars, is set to hit the theaters on March 6th, just a few days before the Oscars take place.
Our culture correspondent Song Yujin, thank you.
My pleasure.
Cold winds stayed in the middle of the day and the weather was chilly today, so there are many places with snow or ice piled up on the roads. On the way home from work, when temperatures drop even more, please pay special attention to icy roads. Light rain and snow have continued only in the inland areas of the Jeollado provinces and on Jeju Island. Rain clouds will persist in this area tomorrow. In the mountainous areas of Jeju Island, where a heavy snow advisory is in effect, up to 10 centimeters of snow will continue until the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, freezing cold temperatures will be felt throughout the central parts of the country. Seoul will start off at -2 degrees Celsius, Daegu and Gyeongju 1 degree. Daily highs will move up to 6 in Seoul, Chuncheon, and Gyeongju. With Jeongwal Daeborim coming up tomorrow, you may be wondering whether the full moon will be visible. Rain clouds will stay in the southern parts of the country. Therefore, the full moon is expected to be seen through the clouds only in some central regions. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Hello everyone, welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine is already entering its third year. Kyiv was receiving support from Western allies from the start of the war, which enabled Ukrainian forces to keep pushing back against Russia's offensives. But after the failure of Ukraine's counteroffensive last year, the war has been deadlocked for some time, causing allies to face fundamental questions on the sustainability of such financial support for Kyiv. How do experts see this war and the geopolitical changes around it? And how do they forecast it to be? For this, we invite Professor Lee Min-jung from Gwangju National University. Professor Lim, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Hanna Hupko, co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Hanna was also the former head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Ukrainian Parliament. Good to have you with us, Hanna.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, first question, Professor Lim. Already 2 years have passed since the outbreak of the Ukraine war. Now, before we get to the details, I would like to ask what economic and geopolitical impact or change this war has brought up to the world. Could you tell us?
Sure. Russia and Ukraine, these two countries are, of course, the two largest countries in the European continent. And Russia, obviously, it does have the largest gas reserve and a very natural resource-rich country, Ukraine as well. Ukraine has provided, such an important, substantial amount of the food to the rest of the world. So this specific war, it does have very huge impact, especially to the field of energy and the food security. Again, if I just take the energy sector, again, the gas, European continent, especially the Western European industrialized countries, they have been dependent on the Russian natural gas, but ever since the war erupted, they have been trying to reduce their dependency on the Russian natural gas. Because of that, again, they have changed their import routes, and then now the United States became the top largest natural gas exporter to the rest of the world, and absolutely the European countries, their imports from the United States has been rising too. So what I'm trying to say is, again, all this gas-related geopolitics has changed this pretty much significantly again ever since the war. And of course, the food security issue, it did make a huge impact to the price, again, the inflation. Before the war erupted, as we all remember, the COVID-19 pandemic, it did last for years, and then most of the countries could not but ease the quantity. So many countries in the world, they already got the pretty abundant cash flow in the market. So this war actually accelerated all this kind of inflation issue in many countries. So some economically weaker countries, they are suffering from so-called stagflation situations. Again, they have inflation at the same time economically their economies are pretty much recessed or like even stagnated. So, of course, again, Russia, as one of the P5 members of the United Nations Security Council, they violated the UN Charter's philosophy spirit. This is absolutely important, thing we need to remember. But geopolitically also, and geoeconomically also, and economically too, it did make many of those ramifications to the rest of the world, I would say.
All right, I see. Thank you for your explanation, Professor Lim. Now, getting to the details now, Hanna, we first need to talk about the war on the ground. The town of Avdiivka was an area on the front line that Ukrainian forces managed to hold just until February 17th, when they withdrew troops from the area. How do you see what Ukrainian forces have done for the past 2 years?
So thank you for inviting me, because it's really important to mention that the war started, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, in 2014 from the illegal annexation of Crimea Peninsula. So it's already 10 years
But back in 2014, it was Russia alone invading Ukraine. In 2024, covering the deficit, Russian army is terrorizing Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian critical infrastructure by using shells and missiles from North Korea, also using kamikaze drones from Iran. So now it's Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and desovereignization of Belarus already happened. So this is the coalition of authoritarian states helping Russia to keep terrorizing Ukrainians and sending more missiles, ballistic cruise missiles, modern Kinzhals, using electronic warfare against Ukrainians. So on your question on Avdiivka, it's important to mention that losing battle doesn't mean losing the war, because within this period of full-scale genocidal war period, so in 2022, Ukraine successfully returned control of Kherson city and partially Kharkiv region in southern part of Ukraine during the successful counteroffensive. So 2023, Ukrainian armed forces demonstrated creativity when we actually keep continuous sending our grain through the grain corridor in the Black Sea, when we used maritime drones to destroy Russian Navy. Can you imagine Ukraine without Navy? We destroyed around 40% of Russian Navy big military ships, which were using also to send missiles to the different cities in Ukraine. And 2024, we do hope to receive F-16, more long-range missiles, especially after the news when Iran made this decision to provide 400 ballistic missiles to Russia. And I think we prove that we are a very resilient country. We keep fighting and expecting that our Western friends will finally wake up and provide us more weapon needed to continue battlefield progress with liberation of the territories.
All right. Well, I believe it is very important for us to note that losing one battle does not mean losing a war entirely. Now, Professor Lim, staying on Russia's Avdiivka capture, Russia said Ukraine's withdrawal from Avdiivka was an unconditional success. However, according to the Telegraph, Russia lost 17,000 troops since May in order to take the regime. Now, regarding this, many say Putin did it with the presidential election in mind. How do you see this?
Well, of course, their presidential election is coming, within like 1 month. I mean, we will see anyhow the result. Of course, many just think anyhow the Putin will be winning the presidential election, but how large his victory gonna be, that might remain as, how would you say, as a kind of, question mark. But having said that, again, I truly appreciate the other panelists. Again, the Ms. Hukko's that very impressive comment, losing one battlefield is that does not necessarily mean the losing the war. I was very much impressed by that comment. But anyhow, ever since the war erupted, again, both countries financially and the human resources too, as long as these war lasts for years, again, both sides, again, will be, suffering financially, and they keep losing their own precious people. So how can just, we conclude, the international society, to conclude this tragedy? It's still very much, we don't have very clear answer about that. But however, anyhow, the presidential election is one thing, and as long as, their regime is an authoritarian regime, again, his victory is pretty much likely. But again, as I said, how large it's going to be and how the international society will interpret that presidential election result will stay, I think, remain as a question mark on the table.
All right, I see your point. Now, I'd like to also tap on domestic politics. Hannah, for this, Ukraine was embroiled in controversy as just 2 weeks ago, Zelensky announced the dismissal of top commander Valery Zaluzhny. How did the Ukrainians see this event?
So, of course, Ukrainians love Zaluzhny, and he's the most popular general in Ukraine. And, of course, when he left, so this was really important to understand who will replace Zaluzhny and what is the strategy. What is the military strategy of Ukraine to win? So the key is here, and now we see how political and military leadership of Ukraine are working together on the law on mobilization, because we need to rotate the defenders who are already 2 years in trenches. Plus, we also are working on to decrease the conscriptancy age from 27 years old to down. And also we need to win the war using technological advanced weapon. And one of the successes I mentioned in the Black Sea, it's happened because of the maritime drones. So as previously General Zaluzhny mentioned, to win the war with Russia, we need to obtain the modern technologies, and I'm very thankful to those countries who are donating to our military, in particular South Korea, Japan, Norway, UK, because we need to change our strategy and actually understand that we cannot compete with Russia on the manpower. Russia is 4 times bigger by population, so they could send more and more men as they can afford it. When we value every life of our defender, this is why we need now to localize defense industries and also to do this technological mobilization with more drones, more electronic warfare, and actually keep progressing in the Black Sea, demilitarizing Russian presence, and actually guarantees that we are the food security guarantor in the world, because Ukraine belongs still to the top 5 of the world agriculture producer. And we don't want to see how people in global South countries, especially in Africa, are suffering because of the weaponization of hunger. It's the same tactic during Soviet Union Stalin used against Ukrainians, organizing man-made famine, Holodomor, genocide, and now Russia wants, by daily destroying our farmers' lands, sending missiles, they don't want Ukrainian farmers to feed the world. And actually, I'm working now on a big campaign, Make Russia Pay. It's a campaign to confiscate Russian central bank money, 300 billions of US dollars. And we want part of this money of confiscated Russian assets to buy food, grain in Ukrainian farmers and to deliver it to African countries.
All right, I see your point. Well, Professor Lim, I'd like to also tap on the recent death of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny, which triggered the U.S. to soon announce a major sanctions package against Russia. Now, what impact is this going to have on the war?
Well, as the war lasts longer than expected, again, even the Western allies or Western like-minded countries among themselves, we did see some kind of, again, the differences or like gaps, perception gaps even between them, which is pretty much understandable. For example, here in East Asia, again, Japan is an archipelago like the United Kingdom. And from their point of view, again, the China as a continental power is a huge kind of threat or challenge to them. And South Korea, Of course, we did have a fight with the PRC before. However, economically, we have cooperated with the PRC for many years. And then from our point of view, again, kind of, perception about the threat from China was slightly different from the perception of threat of Japan. So likewise, again, I do see a kind of, even though it is not that much significant difference, but we still see a kind of difference between for example, United Kingdom and the United States. U.S. is, out of the region, and U.S., of course, Europe is absolutely one of the most important regions from the Washington's point of view. However, from Washington's point of view, this whole era is more about the competition with China. So they definitely need to care about this region too. So as long as we do see a kind of, that kind of strategic perception gaps between the Western allies, it was probably a little difficult to focus, to concentrate our efforts to back up the Ukraine. But I'm terribly sorry about Mr. Navalny's death, but probably thanks to that event, it looks like now Western societies are more heading to the kind of how would you say, they are trying to reunite their own efforts to back up the Ukraine. The sanctions itself, I'm terribly sorry to say that too, but sanctions itself, as long as Russia can find out an alternative like China or like India, they have both, Russian gas, with a pretty affordable price for the last couple of years. So how effective the sanction per se gonna be? It can be a little, doubtful, but still, I do see a kind of political impact of that specific event.
All right, I see. Well, Professor Lim mentioned how there's a strategic perception gaps even among the Western allies, and so I'd like to ask Hannah about this. You see, as a matter of fact, there were many reports that Washington is actually considering shifting its strategy regarding the Ukraine war, turning to a more defensive posture than driving Russia from Ukraine. And also the EU, it had been steadfast supporter of Ukraine, but now it is showing quite a negative view of the war. Now, how are the Ukrainians viewing this?
So I want to continue this Navalny death because I think it's important actually if we mention the Prigozhin rebellion in June 2023. So that suggests that Putin's regime is very vulnerable. And actually, if it loses, the war in Ukraine is likely to fall apart. So I think the West should not underestimate Russia, but it should not overestimate it either. And I just returned from the Munich Security Conference, and I want to see that I saw the shift of narratives and paradigm from Ukraine not losing to Ukraine winning. Because many generals and ministries of defense of the UK, Germany, they are now telling that NATO should be prepared to the war with Russia in next 2, 3, 5, 7 years, or even earlier. So it seems like generals in Europe and NATO, they understand that devastation might go beyond Ukrainian border, and this challenge of land operations will happen also in the NATO territory. Remember, everyone was telling every inch of NATO should be protected. But Ukraine cannot be a shield for Europe forever. This is why we need to get more weapons and actually the most skilled armed forces, like Ukrainian armed forces. We want to contribute to the security of the European continent. And at the Munich Security Conference, we heard from the Prime Minister of Denmark, President of Czech Republic, saying that we need to ramp up production faster to deliver these shells to Ukraine, because look, we are ashamed that North Korea alone provided more shells and ballistic rockets than G7 countries and the EU together. But if you look at economic situation in Russia or economic perspective, so Russian economy ranks between Spain and Italy. When NATO countries, they have like 50% of the global, of the world GDP, yes? So this is, I think, it's a time to help Ukraine to win, to defeat Russian imperialism as a deterrence, as a signal to China and other authoritarian states not to allow China actually to behave like Russia concerning Taiwan on or South China Sea or some other places in the Pacific. So now there is a more understanding of geopolitical importance of Ukraine defeating Russia.
All right. Well, I understand Ukrainians' point of view that Ukraine cannot be a shield for NATO forever, and that they always have to notice the battle could go beyond the Ukrainian border. All right. Now, before I wrap up this show, I'd like to ask this last question to our Professor Lim. Now that this war is moving into its third year, I'd like to ask how the situation might unfold. Now, what are the possible scenarios, Professor?
Well, I'm very sorry, but I don't have a really clear answer for that specific question. The biggest, the most critical variable this year is, as we all probably agree, again, the U.S. presidential election. You know, liberal democracy, we are much more, I believe, much more resilient than the authoritarian regime. However, authoritarian dictatorship, they can be sometimes very, very much more decisive than us. So, you know, this year, whole year will be about, again, the Biden versus Trump, who's going to be who are going to be, you know, living in the White House for the coming 4 years. So, you know, as long as this question, you know, remains as the biggest question for the rest of the rest of the year, so probably the worst situation can remain pretty much vague too. I'm again very sorry, but I truly again appreciate, and I'd love to, personally, I'd love to support, you know, those Ukrainian spirit to fight.
I cannot agree more, and I stand by Ukrainians as well. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Lim and Hannah, for your time and insights today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
God
you.
bless our victory, and thank you for support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.